The sky above Earth darkened as massive ships appeared out of nowhere, blocking the sun and casting long shadows across the planet's surface. The Draconian fleet had arrived. The Draconians were a race known throughout the galaxy for their terrifying military strength. These reptilian light beings were tall, with scales that glimmered like polished metal, and their eyes burned with an unnatural fierce glow. Their fleet was enormous, capable of reducing entire cities to rubble in a matter of minutes. It was said that the Draconians had conquered many worlds before, leaving no survivors behind. Now, they had set their sights on Earth. Humanity, unprepared for such an invasion, had no idea what was coming. Earth's military forces were powerful, but not against an enemy like the Draconians. The governments of the world were in chaos. Alarm bells rang out across the globe as news spread. The planet had never faced a threat like this before. People were terrified, and panic began to spread quickly. On the ground, cities were in a state of emergency. Sirens blared through the streets as soldiers scrambled to prepare their defenses, but they knew in their hearts that they were outmatched. Nothing in their arsenal could hold up against the Draconians' advanced weapons and technology. The alien ships hovered above, their cannons glowing with an ominous light, ready to unleash destruction. In Washington, D.C., the president watched in disbelief as reports of the Draconian fleet's arrival came in from every major city. The once confident leader of the free world now found himself helpless, surrounded by his advisors, trying to come up with a plan. "We need to prepare," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "We can't just let them take over." But deep down, he knew that this was no ordinary invasion. The Draconians were not like any force Earth had faced before. Thousands of miles away, in a small military outpost in the mountains, Captain Thomas Hayes was one of the few people who didn't give in to fear. He had spent years training for this moment, but he never imagined something like this could happen. He stood in front of his team, watching as the news reports flashed across their screens. His men were nervous, but Hayes remained calm. He was the kind of leader who believed in facing every challenge head-on. "We're not going down without a fight," he told them, his voice steady. "We'll do whatever it takes to protect this planet." As Hayes spoke, a low rumble echoed in the distance. The ground shook, and the windows rattled as the Draconian ships moved closer, casting a deep shadow over the land. The air grew heavy, thick with the fear and uncertainty of what was to come. Hayes knew that the Draconians would not stop until they had achieved their goal. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to conquer. The first attacks came just hours after the fleet's arrival. Energy beams fired from the Draconian ships, striking military bases and key cities across the globe. The blasts were so powerful that buildings crumbled to dust within seconds. The cities that once stood tall and proud were now nothing more than smoldering ruins. The world's leaders could only watch helplessly as their forces were torn apart by the alien onslaught. In the midst of the chaos, Hayes received a call from his commanding officer. The voice on the other end was grim. "Captain, we need you to lead a strike team. The Draconians are making their way to the city. If we don't stop them now, we'll lose everything." Hayes knew that his team was inexperienced. Most of them were fresh recruits, far from ready for a fight of this scale, but there was no time to waste. "Understood, sir. We'll hold them off," he said, trying to sound confident, even though his heart raced with fear. He gathered his squad, a group of 8 soldiers, and briefed them on their mission. They were tasked with slowing down the Draconian advance, buying time for the larger military forces to regroup. The Draconians were relentless, and they were closing in fast. There was no guarantee they would survive, but Hayes didn't care. He wasn't going to let Earth fall without a fight. As the team made their way toward the city's outskirts, the sky lit up with explosions. The sound of the Draconian ships' cannons echoed across the landscape. It was a war unlike any the world had ever seen. Hayes could see the fear in his men's eyes, but he knew that they had one thing the Draconians didn't: determination. "What we're up against is bigger than all of us," Hayes said, looking each of his soldiers in the eye. But we fight for Earth. We fight for our homes, our families, and our future. We will not let them take it from us." The team nodded in agreement, their fear turning to resolve. They would stand together, no matter what. They had no idea what was in store, but they knew one thing for sure. Humanity was not going to give up easily. The Draconians might have arrived with the power to destroy, but the strength of human will would be their true test. As Hayes and his team moved into position, they could hear the Draconian ships overhead, ready to unleash their power. It was time to make their stand. The invasion had begun, and humanity's fight for survival was only just starting. The Draconian fleet had only just begun their assault, and already the Earth was feeling the weight of their power. From above, the alien ships looked like dark shadows, their vast hulls blocking out the sun. They fired their energy weapons with terrifying precision, striking military bases, cities, and anything that seemed to stand in their way. The world's governments scrambled to defend themselves, but every attempt seemed to fail. The Draconians were too advanced, too powerful, and their assault was relentless. In the ruins of a once thriving city, Captain Thomas Hayes and his small team of soldiers crouched in a dark alley, watching as the Draconian forces swept through the streets. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, and the sounds of explosions echoed in the distance. Hayes could feel the tension in the air, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. He had led his men into this battle, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were facing. "Stay low and stay quiet," Hayes whispered to his team, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "We can't fight them head-on, but we can slow them down." The soldiers nodded, their faces grim. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of their world. Despite the fear that gripped them, they knew they had no choice but to act. Earth's fate rested on their shoulders. As the team moved through the darkened streets, they could see the destruction the Draconians had already caused. Buildings lay in ruins, their foundations shattered by powerful energy blasts. The once bustling streets were empty, save for the occasional flash of alien troops marching in perfect formation. The Draconians seemed to move with a quiet efficiency, their movements deliberate and controlled. They were here to conquer, and nothing would stand in their way. Hayes led his team to a nearby military outpost, hoping to find any survivors or reinforcements. When they arrived, they found the base in ruins. The walls were scorched, and the ground was littered with debris. It was clear that the Draconians had already struck. Hayes felt a sense of dread wash over him. If they had hit this base so easily, what chance did the rest of the world have? "Sir, we're not going to make it, are we?" one of his soldiers, Private Jackson, asked, his voice shaking with fear. "They're too strong." Hayes looked at his team, seeing the doubt in their eyes. He knew they were scared. They were all scared, but there was no time for fear now. He had to keep them focused, keep them fighting. "We are going to make it," Hayes replied firmly, though he wasn't entirely sure. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. If we can't stop them all, we'll slow them down long enough for the rest of humanity to regroup." Jackson nodded, still looking uncertain, but Hayes could see that the words had helped. He turned back to the team, giving them a silent signal to move out. The soldiers carefully made their way through the shattered remains of the base, looking for any usable equipment or weapons. They couldn't afford to waste any time. As they moved deeper into the ruins, Hayes couldn't help but wonder how much longer they would be able to hold their ground. The Draconian forces were far more advanced than anything humanity had, and yet they had no choice but to fight. Suddenly, an explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. The force of it sent Hayes and his team tumbling to the ground. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of Draconian footsteps grew louder. They were closing in. Hayes quickly pushed himself up, scanning the area. His team was still intact, but they had no time to waste. The Draconians were coming. "Get to cover," he shouted. "Now." The soldiers scrambled for shelter behind the wreckage of an old vehicle. The Draconian forces had arrived. Their figures, tall and imposing, moved in from all sides. Hayes could see their weapons glowing with an eerie light, and the sight sent a chill down his spine. He had seen the Draconians on the news, but seeing them in person was a whole different level of terror. One of the alien soldiers noticed their position and raised a weapon. A bright beam of light shot out, striking the wrecked vehicle just inches from where Hayes had been standing. He could feel the heat of the blast, but he didn't have time to think about it. They had to act fast. "On my signal," Hayes said, his voice low and steady. "We charge." His soldiers looked at him, their faces filled with fear, but they nodded in understanding. They were ready to fight, even if the odds were against them. They had no choice. With a deep breath, Hayes counted down in his mind. 3, 2, 1. On his command, they surged forward, firing their weapons at the advancing Draconians. The blast from their guns was nothing compared to the power of the Draconian weapons, but it was enough to buy them a few precious moments. The soldiers ducked and dove for cover, their hearts pounding as the battle raged around them. They'd fought with everything they had, knowing that this could be their last stand. In that moment, as the battle unfolded, Hayes realized something. The Draconians may have been stronger, they may have had the advantage, but humanity had something they didn't: determination. They might have been outnumbered and outgunned, but they would not go down without a fight. And that was what made them dangerous. As the clash continued, Hayes knew one thing for sure. Earth had not given up, and neither would they. The sun was setting, its fading light barely piercing through the thick smoke that covered the city. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the streets as Captain Hayes and his team fought desperately to hold their ground against the overwhelming Draconian forces. Every minute felt like an hour. Every step forward came at a heavy price. Despite their best efforts, the enemy was relentless. They had managed to damage a few of the Draconian soldiers, but their weapons were far more advanced, and their strength seemed almost endless. The human soldiers were starting to tire, their ammunition running low, their bodies bruised and bloodied from the battle. Hayes could see the exhaustion in their eyes, but there was no time for rest. They had to keep going. "We can't keep this up," Sergeant Lara said, her voice hoarse from the constant shouting and gunfire. She had been with Hayes for years, and he knew she was as tough as they came. But even she was beginning to question how much longer they could survive. Hayes wiped the sweat from his forehead and nodded grimly. He knew it too. The odds were against them, but they couldn't afford to give up. If they fell now, the Draconians would tear through everything in their path, and Earth would fall with them. They had to buy time for the rest of humanity to regroup, to launch a counterattack. "Keep pushing forward," Hayes ordered, his voice filled with resolve. "We're not done yet." They continued their assault, moving through the smoke-filled streets, firing at any Draconian soldiers who came into view. Each battle felt more desperate than the last. The Draconians' weapons were far more advanced, their energy shields nearly impenetrable. But the humans were smart. They used the terrain to their advantage, hiding behind broken buildings, alleyways, and anything they could find. They couldn't match the Draconians' firepower, but they could outthink them. As Hayes and his team fought through the wreckage of the city, a sudden flash of light caught his attention. He turned quickly, his heart racing. A large Draconian warship hovered just above the city, its guns aimed directly at them. The ship's energy cannons powered up, ready to unleash a devastating blast. Hayes knew that if the ship fired, they would all be wiped out in an instant. "Take cover," he shouted, diving behind a pile of rubble as the air around them seemed to hum with energy. The Draconians were preparing to fire. But just as the ship unleashed its deadly beam, something unexpected happened. A loud roar filled the air, followed by the screeching sound of metal on metal. From behind the warship, a smaller human fighter jet zoomed in, its weapons blazing. The fighter jet fired a barrage of missiles at the warship, hitting it directly on the shields. The ship staggered, its weapons faltering for a moment. Hayes couldn't believe his eyes. It was a human jet, a sign of their defiance, but even more surprising was the identity of the pilot. The fighter jet was piloted by none other than Colonel Jessica Cole, one of Earth's top pilots. Hayes had worked with her before, and he knew she was fearless. If anyone could take on a Draconian warship, it was her. "Hold on, team," Hayes yelled, watching as Cole's fighter jet looped around and took another pass at the warship. Her missiles hit their mark again, and the ship's shields flickered. Hayes felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humanity could turn the tide. The Draconian warship fired back, sending a powerful blast toward the jet. But Cole was quick, diving to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. Her fighter jet streaked through the air, moving with lightning speed as it fired once more. This time, the warship's shields couldn't hold. With a massive explosion, the ship was knocked out of the sky, crashing into the city below. The entire battlefield fell silent for a moment. The Draconian forces, stunned by the sudden loss of their warship, hesitated. Hayes seized the opportunity. "Now's our chance. Push forward," he ordered. The soldiers rallied, their spirits lifted by the unexpected victory. With the warship down, they were no longer facing an overwhelming assault. The tide had shifted, just slightly, but it was enough. Hayes and his team moved forward, fighting with renewed determination. As the battle raged on, Hayes couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The Draconians were powerful, yes, but they had underestimated humanity's will to fight. They had underestimated the courage that ran through every soldier's veins, the fierce desire to protect their home. It wasn't just about weapons or technology. It was about something deeper. It was about the human spirit. With each step, Hayes could feel the momentum building. More soldiers arrived to reinforce their position, and soon a wave of human resistance began to take shape. The Draconians were not invincible. They could be stopped, but only if the humans stayed united. The city was far from safe, and the battle was far from over, but the humans had made their mark. The Draconians were not the only force capable of destruction, and as Hayes looked around at his team, his heart swelled with pride. They had come together in the face of certain defeat and stood strong. It was only the beginning, but the fight for Earth was on. The news of the Draconian warship's destruction spread quickly across Earth. For the first time since the alien invasion began, hope flickered in the hearts of humans everywhere. The Draconians, despite their vast power and advanced technology, were not invincible. The humans had managed to land a blow, and that small victory was enough to inspire others to take action. Captain Hayes stood on a makeshift command platform, overlooking the battlefield. His team had retreated to a secure location for the moment, trying to regroup and plan their next move. The Draconian forces were not finished yet. Despite the loss of their warship, the aliens were relentless. The fight was far from over. Hayes looked at the map spread out in front of him, tracing the positions of the remaining Draconian troops. They were advancing in multiple directions, trying to surround the remaining pockets of resistance. But now, the humans were ready. They weren't going to let the invaders have the planet without a fight. "We've made progress," Hayes said, turning to his team. "But the real challenge is ahead. We need to keep pushing and force the Draconians to retreat. If we can hit them hard enough, maybe we can break their hold on Earth." Sergeant Laura nodded. "But we can't keep up this level of resistance forever. We're still outnumbered, and they have far more firepower." "I know," Hayes replied, his voice grim. "But we've shown them we're not an easy target. The Draconians have underestimated us, and now, it's time to use that to our advantage." Just then, a soldier rushed in, breathless from running. "Sir, you need to see this," he said, handing Hayes a communication device. Hayes took the device, pressing it to his ear. A voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and urgent. "Captain Hayes, this is General Anderson. I have news that could turn the tide of this war. You need to meet with us immediately." The urgency in the general's voice was clear. Hayes exchanged a quick look with his team before giving a quick nod. They needed all the help they could get, And if the general had something important, they couldn't afford to waste time. "Where are you?" Hayes asked. "We've located a hidden resistance group in the mountains outside the city. They have a weapon, something we've never seen before. We believe it could help us turn the battle in our favor." "A weapon?" Hayes asked. His interest piqued. "What kind of weapon?" "We're not entirely sure yet, but we've been tracking their movements, and they've been hitting Draconian supply lines without detection. They're stealthy, and they have resources. If we can join forces, we might stand a chance." Hayes' heart raced. A new weapon. It was exactly what they needed to give the Draconians a real fight. He glanced at his team once more. "We're on our way," Hayes said. "Prepare to move out." The team quickly gathered their gear, each soldier knowing the importance of the mission ahead. If this hidden resistance had a weapon capable of taking down the Draconians, it could change everything. The humans needed every advantage they could get. The journey to the Resistance's location was tense. The team moved cautiously, avoiding Draconian patrols along the way. As they made their way through the forested mountains, the weight of the situation hung heavy on their shoulders. They had just begun to believe they could win, but now they were headed into the unknown. Would this new weapon be enough? And who were these mysterious rebels who had managed to survive in the shadows? Finally, after hours of travel, they arrived at the hidden base. It was a series of underground bunkers, camouflaged so well that they blended seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, and the faint hum of machinery buzzed in the background. A tall figure emerged from one of the bunkers, wearing a rugged uniform and a stern expression. Hayes immediately recognized him as Major Robert Greene, the leader of the hidden resistance. "Captain Hayes," Greene said, offering a quick handshake. "I'm glad you made it. We don't have much time, so I'll get straight to the point." Greene led them down into the underground compound, where a group of soldiers were working on something large and imposing. Covered in tarps, it looked like a massive, heavily armored vehicle, unlike anything Hayes had ever seen. "This is our trump card," Greene said, pulling the tarp off with a grunt. Underneath was a large, tank-like machine, its surface sleek and smooth, with glowing energy lines running across its exterior. It looked like a cross between a human-made tank and something alien. "We've been working on this for months," Greene explained. "It's a hybrid weapon, human technology combined with some of the alien tech we've been able to capture. It's not perfect, but it's our best shot at taking down the Draconians." Hayes stood in awe. The machine was unlike anything he had ever seen. It had multiple cannons mounted on its sides, and the glowing energy lines suggested it was powered by some form of advanced energy source. This was no ordinary vehicle. "Is it ready?" Hayes asked, his voice filled with hope. Greene nodded. "It's ready for combat, but we need your help to get it to the battlefield. We'll have to fight our way through Draconian lines to get it into position." Hayes felt a surge of determination. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. With this weapon, they could turn the tide of the war. It was time to make the Draconians regret ever setting foot on Earth. "We'll make it happen," Hayes said, his voice filled with confidence. "Let's move out." With the new weapon in tow, the human resistance was about to face the Draconians head-on. The battle for Earth was about to enter a new phase, one where humanity's ingenuity and determination would shine through. The sun was rising on a new day, but there was no time for rest. The team had barely slept since the discovery of the hidden weapon, and now they were on their way to the battlefield. The Draconian forces were closing in, and humanity's last chance to turn the tide rested on their ability to use this new weapon against the invaders. Captain Hayes led the way, his mind focused on the mission ahead. The hidden resistance's hybrid machine, though impressive, was untested in real combat. They didn't know if it could stand up to the full power of the Draconians' assault. But Hayes had seen the look in his team's eyes. They were ready to fight, no matter the cost. The hybrid machine rumbled behind them, its engines purring as it followed their convoy through the rocky terrain. The vehicle was massive, much larger than anything Hayes had seen before. It had thick armor, energy shields that hummed faintly, and an array of weapons that could level entire buildings. But Hayes knew that it wasn't just the machine that would make the difference. It was the humans behind it. The courage, the will to fight, and the determination to protect their home. As they neared the outskirts of the Draconian stronghold, Hayes held up his hand, signaling the convoy to stop. He and his team dismounted from their vehicles and crouched behind a cluster of rocks, scanning the area. "Do you see them?" Sergeant Laura asked, her voice low as she peered through her binoculars. Hayes nodded. "They're spread out, but they've set up defensive positions along the main road. We'll have to move carefully if we want to avoid being detected." Major Green, leading the resistance fighters, stepped forward. "We'll take the rear and make sure nothing sneaks up behind you. You'll have the front. Keep the Draconians focused on you while we get the machine into position." Hayes looked at his team, each soldier steeling themselves for the fight to come. The Draconians were ruthless, and they knew that their enemy would stop at nothing to crush them. But with the hybrid weapon in their hands, they had a chance. A real chance to win. "Let's move out," Hayes ordered, his voice steady. The team advanced cautiously, using the terrain to their advantage as they moved closer to the Draconian stronghold. The morning fog hung low in the air, giving them some cover. But they couldn't afford to waste any time. The Draconians would be on high alert, and if they weren't careful, they'd be spotted before they could strike. After what felt like hours of careful maneuvering, they reached their position. The hybrid machine was parked just out of sight, ready to make its move. Hayes and his team were positioned in a nearby building, preparing for the assault. Their objective was clear: destroy the Draconian command center and take out as many of their forces as possible. Hayes checked his watch. The time had come. "On my signal," he said, looking at Lara and the rest of the team, "we go in hard and fast." The seconds ticked by as the tension in the air grew. Then, with a deep breath, Hayes gave the order. "Go." The team charged forward, opening fire on the Draconian defenses. The sound of gunfire echoed through the streets as the humans fought with everything they had. The Draconians reacted quickly, returning fire with their energy weapons, but the humans had the element of surprise. They used their knowledge of the terrain to flank the enemy, forcing the Draconians to divide their attention. At the same time, Major Green's team moved the hybrid machine into position, its massive form rising from behind cover and charging toward the Draconian stronghold. The energy shields hummed to life, deflecting incoming blasts as the machine's weapons fired in retaliation. "Focus on the command center," Hayes shouted into his communicator. The team pushed forward, taking out enemy soldiers and creating a path for the machine to advance. The battle was fierce, but the humans were relentless. They knew that this was their moment. This was their chance to turn the tide. Each soldier fought with the belief that they could make a difference, that they could take back their world from the invaders who had tried to conquer it. As the hybrid machine neared the heart of the Draconian stronghold, it unleashed a devastating barrage of missiles. The explosions lit up the sky, sending shockwaves through the enemy lines. The Draconians scrambled to defend themselves, but their defenses were crumbling. "Keep moving. Don't stop," Hayes yelled. The humans pushed forward, continuing their assault on the Draconian forces. In the midst of the chaos, Hayes spotted something. A large Draconian officer, heavily armored and carrying a powerful energy weapon, was making his way toward the hybrid machine. He was intent on stopping it before it could cause any more damage. Hayes didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the officer, taking cover behind a crumbled wall. With a swift motion, he popped out and fired, hitting the officer square in the chest. The alien staggered back, but he didn't fall. The officer raised his weapon, ready to fire, but before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out. Sergeant Laura had lined up her shot perfectly, and the Draconian officer collapsed to the ground. "Nice shot," Hayes said, nodding at Laura. "Thanks," she replied, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. The battle raged on, but the humans were gaining ground. The Draconians were no longer the unstoppable force they had once seemed. The hybrid machine, with its devastating firepower, had turned the tide in favor of the humans. It wasn't just technology that was winning the battle. It was the unyielding spirit of humanity, the belief that they would not go quietly into the night. As the Draconians began to retreat, Hayes allowed himself a brief moment of hope. They had done it. They had broken the enemy's hold on Earth. But the war was far from over. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, and more obstacles to overcome. But for now, humanity had won a decisive victory, and that was enough to keep fighting. The battlefield was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of burning debris and the distant echo of retreating Draconian forces. A hybrid machine, now a symbol of humanity's resilience, stood towering over the ruins of the once impenetrable Draconian stronghold. Smoke drifted up into the sky, and the air was thick with the scent of scorched earth and victory. Captain Hayes stood on the edge of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the horizon. They had won, but at what cost? He ran a hand through his hair, looking down at the map displayed on his communicator. The Draconians had retreated, but the war wasn't over. They'd driven the invaders from this part of Earth, but the larger threat still loomed. "Captain," Laura called from behind him. Her voice was steady, but there was a fatigue in her eyes. "We've taken the area, but there's no sign of the enemy's main fleet. They've gone underground. We need to prepare for the next phase." Hayes nodded, his mind already turning to the next steps. The victory they had just claimed was a fragile one. The Draconians were not a species known for giving up easily. They would regroup, they would adapt. And when they returned, they would come back stronger. "Understood," he said, turning to face her. "We'll need to reinforce our position here, and we can't let our guard down. Let's coordinate with the rest of the resistance groups. We may have a window of time, but I'm not counting on it being long." Lara nodded in agreement. "I'll get in touch with Major Green and the others. We'll strengthen our defenses." As Hayes walked toward the hybrid machine, he saw Major Green approaching. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with the same determination Hayes had seen in every soldier they had fought alongside. "Captain, the hybrid machine did its job," Green said, giving a tired smile. "But we got intel suggesting the Draconians are planning something bigger. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg." Hayes stared at the massive machine, still standing proudly in the center of the battlefield. It had worked. The weapon, the hybrid technology, had turned the tide in a battle that had once seemed lost. But as Green had said, it was just one victory in a much larger war. "We'll be ready for whatever comes next," Hayes said, his voice firm. "But we need more time. Time to regroup, to plan, and to rebuild." Green gave a short nod. "Agreed. But we can't afford to wait too long. The Draconians might be down, but they're never out." The two men stood there for a moment, the weight of their words sinking in. There was still much work to be done. The Draconians were a threat unlike any humanity had ever faced, and this fragile victory had only given them a brief respite. Lara returned shortly after, her communicator buzzing with the latest updates. "The other resistance groups are rallying. They're setting up new defenses, and some are reporting sightings of Draconian scouts. The enemy is still out there, Captain. We need to move fast." Hayes turned to his team. "All right, gather everyone. We'll move out in 20 minutes. This victory has given us a brief moment to breathe, but we don't have the luxury of sitting still." The team quickly gathered, readying themselves for the next phase. They had won a major battle, but they knew that the war was far from over. The Draconian fleet, though scattered, was still a formidable threat, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim their hold over Earth. Hayes watched his team as they prepared. Each person had a quiet strength about them, a resilience that was impossible to ignore. They had faced the worst and come out on top, but they were not naive enough to think the war was over. They were prepared for whatever came next, even if it meant sacrificing everything for the chance to protect their home. As the last of the team members mounted their vehicles and took their positions, Hayes felt a sense of unity. Despite the odds, despite the uncertainty, they had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of. It was more than just the hybrid weapon that had turned the tide. It was their courage, their willingness to fight for each other, and their unwavering belief that they could win. "Captain," Major Green said, his voice breaking through Hayes's thoughts, "you know that even if we win this, there will always be another fight. The Draconians will never stop. They'll keep coming back." "I know," Hayes replied, his tone calm but resolute. "But every time they come back, they'll find us stronger. And we'll keep fighting, because Earth isn't just our home. It's where humanity shows what it's made of." Green nodded, understanding the weight of Hayes's words. Humanity had fought back once, and they would fight back again. They had shown the universe that they were not to be underestimated, that they were not a species to be crushed underfoot. The Draconians had learned that lesson the hard way. But now, humanity had to prove it once more. As Hayes climbed into the cockpit of his vehicle, he glanced out at the horizon. The battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, humanity had hope. And with that hope came the strength to keep fighting, no matter the cost. The Draconians might have retreated, but they would soon realize that humanity's spirit was not so easily defeated. The sun was setting over the barren landscape, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The war had taken everything from Earth, but it had also given humanity something extraordinary: unity. Across the planet, cities that had once been in ruins were slowly rebuilding, but a new challenge loomed on the horizon. The Draconians were coming back. The war wasn't over yet. Captain Hayes stood at the command center, looking over the final plans for their last stand. The Draconian fleet had regrouped, and they were preparing for one final assault. This time, they wouldn't retreat. The Earth had become their battleground, and they were determined to see it through to the end. "Captain," Lara's voice interrupted his thoughts. She was standing beside him, a mix of exhaustion and resolve in her eyes. "The Draconians have set their sights on the last stronghold. It's the only place left where we can make a stand. If we lose this, the whole planet could fall." Hayes nodded, his mind already racing through the options. The stronghold was the last line of defense, but the Draconians had been relentless in their assault. They had learned from their previous mistakes, and now, with the hybrid machine's technology and the remaining resistance forces, they had to make the final push. "We'll hold the line. We don't have a choice," Hayes said, his voice firm, though he could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. This was the moment that could decide everything. The team gathered, ready to face the coming storm. Major Green walked in, followed by several other key leaders of the resistance. They all knew the gravity of the situation. There would be no more chances, no more mistakes. The Draconians would either conquer Earth or be defeated once and for all. "We've prepared the defenses," Green said, looking over the holographic display of the stronghold's perimeter. "But we know the Draconians will come prepared this time. They've adapted. They've learned." "Then we adapt too," Hayes replied, the plan already forming in his mind. "We've seen what they can do, but they haven't seen the best of us yet. They underestimated us once. Let's make sure they don't do it again." The last few days had been a blur. Every soldier, every resistance fighter, had given their all. Supplies had been rationed, defenses reinforced, and every piece of the hybrid technology had been deployed. But it was clear the Earth could not hold out forever. The Draconians were too strong, too determined. If humanity was going to survive, they would have to make one final push. Lara stepped forward, her voice steady. "The hybrid machines are ready, but they will only be effective for a short time. We need to buy as much time as possible to make this final stand count. If we can hold them back long enough, we can break their forces once and for all." Hayes nodded. "Understood. The rest of the team will provide support. We'll make sure that hybrid technology is used to its fullest. The Draconians may have the numbers, but we have the heart. The sound of engines in the distance reached them, signaling that the enemy was approaching. The Draconian fleet, vast and intimidating, was on its way. The time for talking was over. The final battle had begun. As the resistance soldiers took their positions and the defenses were activated, Hayes couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had been pushed to the brink of extinction, yet here they stood, ready to defend their home. They had no superhuman powers, no advanced alien technology, just determination and an unbreakable will to survive. Lara gave Hayes a brief nod before moving into position. "We've come this far," she said. "Now, let's finish this." The first wave of Draconian forces arrived like a storm. Their ships filled the sky, darkening the horizon. But humanity wasn't afraid. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to back down now. The hybrid machines fired, launching devastating blasts into the oncoming fleet, pushing them back for a moment. But the Draconians quickly regrouped. Hayes and his team were at the front, pushing forward with everything they had. Every resistance fighter, every soldier, every civilian who had joined the fight was standing together. They were more than just a collection of people now. They were Earth's last hope. The battle raged on for hours, each side refusing to give up. Explosions rocked the ground, and laser fire lit up the night sky. But even as the Draconians pushed closer, humanity fought back with everything they had. As the hours passed, it became clear that the tide was turning. The Draconians, once confident in their victory, were faltering. Their forces were being whittled down, and their machines, so advanced and so terrifying, were no match for the human will to survive. Finally, as the last Draconian ship was destroyed, silence fell over the battlefield. The resistance stood victorious. The Draconians had been driven off Earth, and humanity had won the day. But Hayes knew this victory wasn't just about surviving. It was about something much more important. They had shown the galaxy that humanity could stand up against the greatest threats, that they could rise from the ashes and fight for what mattered most. Earth was theirs, and it would remain theirs. The battle was over, but the fight for humanity's future had only just begun. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity stood tall.